Welcome to Turn the Page, the official podcast of the Syosset Public Library.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to Turn the Page. I'm your host today, Jen, and I am joined by the author of a sophomore work of cozy fantasy fiction. It is an absolutely delightful, heartwarming, affirming story, and I am so excited to talk about it. Welcome to the show. Could I ask you to introduce yourself and your book, please?
Course, yeah. Hi, Jen. Thanks so much for having me on. My name is Julie Leong. Like Jen mentioned, I'm the author of some cozy fantasy books, the first of which is The Teller of Small Fortunes, which came out in fall of last year. And then my most recent book, my second one, The Keeper of Magical Things, just came out a couple weeks ago. I live in San Francisco with my very fluffy rescue dog, my husband, our magical Meyer lemon trees in the backyard. And I work in tech, but I am also very excited to get to be able to write, cozy warm, whimsical stories and share them with all of you. So, yeah.
Nice. Yeah, I'd love to know a little bit more about your journey as a writer, what brought you
Mhm.
to cozy fantasy, and about your first book a little bit.
Yeah, so I never planned to be a writer, which is, it feels like a strange impostery thing to say because I'm surrounded by a lot of really amazing author friends and writer friends who have had this as kind of a lifetime aspiration. I think I just never let myself have that dream because I'm the daughter of immigrant parents who, came from Malaysia to America. I was born in America, but like many children of immigrants, we kind of are raised to believe that, you go to a good school, you get a good education, you get a good, stable, well-paying career, and that's kind of your life path is set for you. And a lot of creative pursuits like writing or creative professions are never really on the table as something that you consider to be practical or responsible. And so I was kind of going through those motions for much of my life where I studied economics and politics. I ended up working in finance for a bit. Then I transitioned into tech. I was at Google for a couple of years. But really, what set me off the path of becoming an author was life throwing me a really big curveball. This was during kind of middle COVID or so, but my dad was diagnosed with late stage cancer. It's a happy ending. He's now in remission against the odds. So just seeding that it ends well. But at the time, the doctors told us that it was probably terminal, that it could be months, etc. And that's a really scary thing to be told. So I didn't know what to do, but I decided to quit my job, my nice stable career in tech, to kind of spend more time with him to help care for him during his treatment. And that was the first time in my life as an adult that I wasn't pouring myself into work or school or things like that. And I had all this time and a lot of, feelings about scary things happening in the world and with my family. So I turned to books, which have always been a love of mine, even if I never thought that I was going to become a writer. I've always been a huge, voracious reader. And so I turned to books for comfort in kind of these very difficult times. And I was just binge reading like all the sci-fi fantasy that you can imagine. I was working my way through like top 100 lists, going back to old series like Discworld and Redwall that I always loved, reading like new stuff, new authors to me. And it was just such a wonderful escape. But I found myself gravitating during this time in like 2020 three-ish towards books that made me feel good because, I was dealing with feelings about my dad's illness, about COVID. And so it was comforting at the time to read books that fell into this camp of being comforting and warm and kind and optimistic. I think it's just kind of an instinct when the world is dark and cold, you want like warm and bright. And so I found these books that were just beginning to be called cozy fantasy, books like Legends and Lattes by Travis Baldree, The Very Secret Society of Regular Witches by Sangha Mandana, House in the Cerulean Sea, Everything T. Kingfisher is written, like all these books that just make you feel like things are going to be okay. And I was reading them one after the other, and then I kind of ran out of them, specifically of these cozy, warm, uplifting, magical books set in fantasy worlds. And it was at that time that I was like, well, why don't I try, for this first time I have so much spare time and I don't know what to do with myself and all my feelings. Why don't I try writing my own? And so that was how The Teller of Small Fortunes came to be. It was really me writing the book that I wanted to be reading at the time, a book that was warm and uplifting and magical, but also, had a character that looked like me, which is something that I didn't have a lot of growing up reading typical Western European set fantasies. And I wrote this book for myself, and then I was like, well, now that it's written, maybe I should try to see what I can do with this thing. And I learned a little bit more about publishing and how it works, and how you get agents, and how agents get you publishers. And so I just kept saying, all right, well, let's try it and see how it goes. And, maybe it won't go anywhere. Maybe I won't get an agent. Maybe it won't sell. There's many checkpoints in traditional publishing for you to be rejected and to fail at. But at every turn, I ended up being very fortunate with my timing, I think, that the market was craving books like these. And so The Teller of Small Fortunes ended up coming out last fall, and it's been just such a crazy, wonderful, unexpected ride for me to know that, I get to call myself an author and my books are on the shelves alongside authors that I was reading during really hard times. And yeah, it's been really amazing.
It makes a ton of sense to me that in a time not only caring for your father, but in, sort of peak pandemic times when we were all very isolated, that you would create these characters who like feel like friends very quickly, like they're very
Yeah,
warm and they're like it's just like, it's really refreshing to read about like good people doing their best being friends.
exactly. I think that's most of us, we're all just doing our best.
Yes. So I'd love to know a little bit more about the inception point for
Mhm.
the Keeper of Magical Things. You deal with a lot of, similar themes and interests. I think you have a
Yeah.
lot of like focus on community and cooperation and
Mhm.
finding connection. Where did this one all begin?
Yeah, so The Keeper of Magical Things, for those who aren't familiar with kind of either of these two books, it's set in the same world as The Teller of Small Fortunes, which is this hopefully familiar feeling, nostalgic feeling kind of kingdom that's slightly Western European, but with characters that are not necessarily of that background, and magic is kind of a normal thing there. This is a fantasy world. And it's set in the same world, but you don't need to have read the first one to read this one. Different cast of characters entirely. They are both fully standalone. But the origin for both of these books was had some commonality in that I really liked the idea of taking magic. And, I come from reading a lot of epic fantasies growing up. And so I love myself a good epic fantasy. But I also, for a cozy fantasy, like the idea of taking familiar tropes from epic fantasy and kind of shrinking them down to fit day-to-day stories. Not everything has to be about the end of the world or like the kingdom being destroyed or the Dark Lord. Oftentimes, life is just kind of about the smaller things and the smaller moments and the smaller stakes. And so for the Teller of Small Fortunes, the seed of that concept, and then it's in the title, is kind of you take epic prophecies and you shrink it down to what if this fortune teller only tells small, insignificant, marginal, everyday fortunes. And the Keeper of Magical Things was, all right, well, these epic fantasies have the sword of truth and like the one ring to rule them all and these artifacts that are just so powerful, these magical gadgets that are like everybody's trying to get them and the fate of the universe depends on this artifact that is enchanted with some like hyper powerful spell. So if you shrink that, what do you get is like a kind of everyday enchanted object. What if you took the least important magical artifacts and, put them in a domestic setting? And how do you use magical artifacts in a kitchen or like to clean up a barn or to freshen up a tavern? And that was kind of the core magical concept. The characters came from, as you alluded to, these are cozy fantasies, and I think a core part of cozy fantasy is about found family and about building community around you and finding joy in community. So that was always going to be there. But I did want to change it up a little bit. Teller of Small Fortunes was very much kind of a journey across the kingdom. It was like a, fantasy adventure road trip. Keeper of Magical Things, I wanted to have set in one place. I really love the kind of trope of a community being built up piece by piece, person by person, relationship by relationship. And so having the Keeper of Magical Things be set in this kind of unremarkable, unmagical village of Spelling that starts out the book in kind of disrepair and neglect, but through the actions of the characters and the relationships that they form, kind of gets turned into this magical kind of haven, was something that I want to explore.
Nice. Yeah, I'm curious about your magic system and the sort
Yeah.
of um I don't want to say small stakes sounds dismissive, and I don't mean it that way, but
No,
the sort
yeah.
of like let's intimate everyday life sort of
Mhm.
magic and building, and it's playful too, like there's
Yeah.
humor and warmth to it. How does how does like the magic system that you build and people's individual abilities, like
Mhm.
certainty, great name by the way,
Thank you.
fantastic name. Um, how does like the magic system help inform her character, if that makes sense?
Yeah, no, it totally does. Also, uncertainty. I'm glad you like the name because I've actually heard from a few readers who are like, "Oh, I liked it, but I kept reading her name as certainly in the beginning of a sentence and it threw me off." And I was like, "Oh no, it did not even occur to me. Bad for, people with dyslexia and things." Um, but yeah, the magic system. So I think the first thing is I definitely had a lot of fun writing this because I generally feel that readers will kind of get through osmosis what you put into a book. And so if you're having fun when you're writing it, chances are readers will probably have fun when they're reading it, or at least that's the hope. And so getting to like inject the artifacts with some whimsy of like what exactly is it that they can do? And that's a little bit silly, but let's go with it, was something that I enjoyed. For certainty, though, the powers that the individual characters have, maybe a little bit of context for those who haven't read the books yet. So Certainty and Aurelia are the two main characters, and they are both mages within the Guild of Mages, which is this kind of like structured organization that helps run the kingdom and takes all of the people with, magical powers and trains them up to be spellcasters and deploys them in kind of different roles. Certainty is a novice, and Aurelia is a full mage, and theoretically, mages all should be able to learn to cast different kinds of spells, like utilitarian spells, but they also have their own unique magical abilities that kind of set them apart. And Certainty, a big part of her character arc is that her magic is kind of super weak and not particularly useful, which is why she's still stuck at novice level. She has a magical ability and then hasn't been able to learn any spells, and so she really has to rely on this one magical ability to try to justify her existence in this guild. And that magical ability is the ability to speak to physical objects mentally. And, sometimes convince them to make very small changes, but like she really can't do a whole lot with it. She's just like conversing with a tablecloth. Whereas Aurelia is a very powerful mage and can do all kinds of things and is also a far speaker, which means she has the ability to kind of communicate over long distances with other mages who've been trained to receive them. And so their particular powers, I use them both for plot. Like Certainty's ability to talk to physical artifacts is kind of a core part of the premise for why they're in this village taking inventory of magical artifacts. But I also wanted the powers to be a little bit a reflection, sort of an inverted reflection of their character arcs. So their personalities are very different. Certainty is kind and generous and open. And kind of just wants to be helpful, just generally very like eager. Um, Aurelia starts off very closed off, and you learn later that's kind of a result of her upbringing and her family situation and the heavy expectations that have been placed on her. But it's interesting because Certainty, who is just really empathetic and good at communicating with people, her ability is sort of a reflection of that. She has the ability to speak to objects, to see their worth, even though other people are dismissive of these, insignificant kind of lower grade magical artifacts as being important. She's the one who can talk to them and find a way to use their powers to do good for the community. And that is kind of how she is with people too. She kind of like brings out the best of them and is able to see beyond just the superficial value and grading and, worth that society assigns to them. Whereas Aurelia, the irony is that she's very distant. She doesn't have a lot of close relationships at the start of the book. And she struggles to kind of have that level of empathetic communication that Certainty has. And yet her magical ability is one that theoretically is one that allows her to communicate with other people across distances. And we learn, at one point in the book that this is something that she's been struggling with. Her magical ability has actually been kind of blocked for a while for reasons, plot spoiler reasons. And that's sort of a reflection of her arc too. She learns through Certainty, through kind of the course of the story and building relationships with the villagers, how to kind of take down those walls and communicate better with people. And that's a parallel of what happens to your magical ability throughout the book as well.
Mm. It's a really nice illustration to me of like the difference between like hard power and soft power, if you want to say
Yeah.
it that way. Like because Aurelia has the ability to reach people, to influence people, but not just
Yeah.
like connect with them.
Yeah.
Like and that's like and they do have something to learn from each other that is like really lovely. I have just a couple more questions
Yeah,
about
of course.
spelling and specifically like the relationship between the town and the guild and sort of like
Mhm.
world building, all that. In particular, I'm interested about how like I think you have a something serious to say, even though it's like a cozy story about like hoarding and hierarchy and who
Yeah.
should have access to what and what we owe each other. But it
Yeah.
is wrapped in this really like cozy packaging. So how do you balance like to put it like reductively, like message
Yeah.
vibes.
No, I totally get that. That's such a good question. I think the answer is I don't think I do it um, as well as some of the masters. And so I'm writing cozy fantasy, which is a new term for this subgenre. But books like these have always existed, even if we didn't have like a specific title branding for it. I look back at a lot of the books that I read growing up, and Discworld, the Discworld books by Terry Pratchett are very near and dear to my heart. And to me, those are cozy. And I could go on a whole sidebar about what cozy fantasy means, because I think cozy, it's like a feeling, and therefore it's going to mean different things to different people. But to me, the Discworld books are both cozy in that at their heart, there's kind of a kindness and optimism. And, there's not going to be terrible, dark things that make you very nihilistic about the future of the human race. But there's also this anger. Terry Pratchett, I think, was so good at this, where he was deeply angry at injustices that he saw in our world. And I think he like turned those into fantasy things that were silly and funny and fantastical, but were still about these kind of real things. And he wrapped it all in like his trademark wisdom and humor and all these things. Um, and my books should not be on the same shelves as Terry Pratchett. I would not ever go so far as to say that I'm like, you know, his peer, but they're definitely following in his tradition. And I don't think that being cozy means you get to ignore the hard things about the world. In fact, I think sometimes putting in those kind of real things and having something a little bit bitter to contrast with the sweet and the light and the fluffy, is what makes the good things feel more warm and kind, as opposed to if you just had like only the fluffy parts and put those into a book, it's a little bit like a cotton candy book.
Mm.
And, no hate to cotton candy books. I love them too. But like sometimes you need a little bit savory mixed in with that and, to have a balanced diet. And this metaphor is getting away from me. Um, but the point is that I don't think having one negates or cancels out the other. In fact, I think sometimes having both makes them both feel more real.
That's a really good point. And maybe, I don't know if this is like mincing words, but I don't know if that's maybe the difference between like escapism and like dissociation, like something
Yeah,
that like maintains your connection to the world,
yeah,
but like through a different lens or a different point of view, and something that is like sort of, I don't know,
yeah.
separating you from that world.
Yeah, I think that's right. And I think sometimes it's the contrast that makes the cozy feel cozier. It's like how being by, a warm fire hearth in a tavern when it's cold and dark feels better. It's like knowing that there are bad things in the world, but that people are mostly good and mostly trying their best, and that through building community, you can kind of make change. That is at its heart kind of an uplifting message, and you need something to change from in order to kind of believe in that.
Absolutely. Um, so I know it's sometimes hard for authors to talk about what's on the horizon, but are you writing at the moment?
At this immediate moment, I'm kind of in between things. I'm waiting on edits for what will become book three, which hopefully will be out next fall. It is still a fantasy, but it's actually a little bit different from both The Teller of Small Fortunes and The Keeper of Magical Things. It's set in an entirely new world, new universe, and it's a little bit less cozy and a little bit more, not quite epic, but sort of in that direction. And so that book like I'm sure a lot will change between now and publication. Like I said, I'm waiting for edits, which is kind of yeah, putting a book through the grinder. But as of now, I think I would describe it as a little bit of The Witcher meets East Asian mythology. And so I guess the one-liner is it's about a monster hunter who hunts monsters in this fantastical kingdom that's overrun by monsters. She is secretly also a dragon and secretly rescues a good portion of the monsters she's supposed to be hunting and brings them back to her island sanctuary.
That sounds great. And I am very, very excited to read that. So thank you so much for taking the time out of your schedule to talk about this book. And yeah, I happily await the next. Thank
Of
you.
course. Yeah, thanks so much for having me on.
You're very welcome. Listeners, please check out The Keeper of Magical Things. And while you're at it, you might as well check out The Teller of Small Fortunes if you haven't already. We're heading into the holiday season, and I think these are also really warm books that like really capture a sort of found family celebration together vibe, and they would make excellent, excellent gifts for any holiday. You can find them at your favorite bookstore or library or website. Do you have a favorite bookstore that you like to send people to?
Ooh, many. Here in San Francisco, where I live, Noe Valley Books is an amazing queer woman-owned indie bookshop in Noe Valley, like 10 minutes away from me. I always stop by when I'm going to the farmers market next door, and just really, really great people. And if you order through them, I am happy to drop by and kind of sign any orders that they will ship out. And then, yeah, if you're somewhere else, Blue Cypress Books in New Orleans, Louisiana, another amazing woman-owned indie bookshop. Big fans of them. So,
Nice. Love that. Love to give people, bookshop tourism options. So
yeah,
thank you again. This has been wonderful.
of course. Yeah, thanks.
All right. And thank you, listeners. It is now time to close this chapter. We'll see you next time.
It's time to close this chapter of Turn the Page. Join us for the next episode.